Paul, that this poster is the centerpiece of my my living room. My kids have grown up with his work. On the other end of the living room is another Chicago cartoonist, Chris Ware's work. Actually, I wanted to kind of maybe begin by just talking about Chicago before we get back to the important place, Columbus. Right. Because you're kind of part of a pretty exciting comic scene over there. I mean, you got a kind of group of cartoonists, kind of roughly at your stage in the career, people like Anders Nilsson and Jeffrey Brown.
Not anymore. Anders moved.
He moved? Where did he move?
I think Minneapolis.
He moved back to Minneapolis. See, I was going to say they all kind of gravitated.
But that was only in the last couple months.
Oh, okay. Well,
we'll still count.
We'll still count him.
Yeah.
You got Jeffrey Brown still.
He's still there. Yeah.
All right. And a couple of, and you got some older guys, more closer to my age, like Chris Ware, of course, and Ivan Brunetti. I was just wondering if it seems like people talk a lot about the kind of scene of comics in the kind of Northwest or in Montreal, but you don't hear as much about the Chicago scene. But it seems like there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. You guys actually have a lot in common. Mm-hmm. I was just wondering if you could talk about kind of what it's been like for you in kind of maturing as a cartoonist in that peer group.
Yeah, I don't know. And people ask me about the comic scene in Chicago, and the thing is, we're all these sort of pseudo hermits that.
Well, you're cartoonists.
Yeah, exactly. Seeing other human beings is sort of a novelty. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was kind of. I think I moved to Chicago, and I was aware of that. The fact that Anders lived there. I didn't know Jeff. I mean, Chris introduced me to Jeff Brown. So it wasn't really something that I really thought about moving to Chicago. It was basically I didn't know anybody, and I liked the architecture. That was one of the two main reasons for moving there.
And they had Quimby's.
And they did have Quimby's. I knew they had good comic shops, but that was the thing. I didn't really have any hardcore aspirations of like, okay, I'm gonna move to Chicago and I'm gonna make it big. See, that's gonna, there wasn't any. I honestly wasn't really planning on doing comics for a career necessarily. I was working for, I was a sales representative for a print company from Canada, so.
Right, out of Winnipeg, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, that wasn't really.
And part of that, then, the kind of visits to Winnipeg made Chicago feel balmy and.
Oh yes.
And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I realized how good we had it. But yeah, there's a lot of amazing stuff in Chicago. I don't really know what the draw is per se. It is a very good place to do work. I feel like to some degree, if you want to be seen or be part of a scene properly, you go to New York or you go to LA. And then if you want to stay inside 6 months of the year and do work, you go to Chicago.
Right.
So, yeah, because you just literally don't want to leave your house for like 5 or 6 months. So. Which is
pretty much what's required if you're going to get this incredibly inefficient form called comic stuff.
People have joked about, it's the city that works, but it is really, I do feel like Chicago just has a zero pretension, and it very much is about, if you're not producing new work, nobody really cares, and, yeah. So, in that way, I feel like
that's not the case in the Brooklyn scene.
I don't want to talk Brooklyn.
We won't talk trash there. All right, let's get back to the important place. You grew up in Ohio. Yeah. Outside of Cincinnati, and one of the things that has always struck me, and I always have to ask Ohio-born cartoonists about this, whether they have any insight into it, is what is it about this state that produces so many cartoonists? From the beginning of sequential art on, we have produced far more than our share. Most of them leave, but quite a few stay.
So you've lived in Ohio, right?
I have, yes.
Okay,
so what is it about? You think it's, Chicago I get, okay, 6 months inside a year. What is it about Ohio that?
I don't know. To some degree, I feel like, I don't want to get, I'm no expert in like child psychology, but to some degree I feel like.
Yes, you are. I've been reading your book.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that. But, I feel like, if you sort of, to some degree I was having this conversation with some people last night, but, if you kind of overstimulate a kid, I feel like, and there's plenty of studies that show this, their creativity isn't necessarily as good. Sorry if everybody watches, tons of TV with their kids. But, like, I feel like when you've got nothing to figure out on your own and there's no creativity that you have to sort of come up with on your own, you're kind of robbed of coming up with things of your own volition. And I feel like Ohio provides lack of stimulation in spades, so
so Ohio's a good place to nurse, and then when you want to get the work done, you go to Chicago.
Yeah, well, all right. And I mean, Chicago.
All you young cartoonists, take note.
No, but I mean, honestly, to some degree, the fact that there isn't, there is a very appreciable lack of glitz and glamour, which I think is a very good thing. I'm not knocking that at all. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, but why? Yeah, exactly. Why are there not as many cartoonists like coming out of Indianapolis or something? I'm not sure. That I have no answer for.
The other thing, of course, we've produced far more than our share of is presidents, and you seem to have an obsession.
The best president.
You seem to have an obsession with one of them here. This is one of your.
Well, I grew up in the town where U.S. Grant is from, so everybody in the town is obsessed with U.S. Grant. But I became sort of obsessed with Grant because he's just kind of, I don't know, to me he's such an amazing, tragic figure. I mean, I grew up being very obsessed with kind of the refuse of pop culture anyway, and he sort of, to me, kind of fits in that too, where, I mean, he's this great man, but essentially he was just kind of forced into greatness. He never really wanted to be great,
and he battled with lots of demons.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. Like there were basically two moments in his life where he became great, and both times it really had nothing to do with his own choice. It was, he became a great general, but that really wasn't of his own choosing, and he wrote a great memoir, but that was because his family needed money. And I don't know, he's always been really, interesting to me because the town is kind of obsessed with him, but... At one point you mentioned you might have a book on I am working on a book about U.S. Grant, yes. So.
I think that might be the moment where you can bring together and finally answer this strange confluence of cartoonists and presidents.
I want to do that at a point where I can afford to buy my parents a house outside of that town, because I don't know that I'll ever be able to go back there.
And I know you grew up, you didn't grow up surrounded by comics. Your parents were kind of lawyers and from kind of science and math background, is that right?
No, just pretty much philosophy and law. I think my mother taught math to inmates at some point, but that's sketchy and I don't want to go into that. Actually, I really don't know. I remember that being some fact. It was like, what? But yeah, most of my pop culture diet was either what was found in the New Yorker or, my mom had a few Edward Gorey collections. The weirdest thing is if you meet my mom, she's certainly has a good sense of humor, but she's pretty straight-laced for the most part. But all the cartoons she was into were the weirdest. It was Charles Addams, Edward Gorey, Gaian Wilson, like all these people that were just disturbing cartoonists.
Good influences.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the rest of my comics really was just stuff that I could find in flea markets, and so it was everything I grew up reading was from maybe 10, 15 years earlier, and it never had any connection to anything, because it'd be like, stay tuned for next issue, like there was no next issue for anything for me, so like I always just kind of made up my own stories about things, and sort of, I would find things and have be like Godzilla in the Wild West, and it was like, oh, clearly that must make sense to have Godzilla in the Wild West. Okay, that actually is a comic. That was one of my first comics.
Wow.
But to me that was like, oh well, this must be a normal comic. Is something this bizarre, or like the disco version of Karate Kid was.
I remember that one. Yes.
Yeah, where he battles an African American ne'er-do-well who really is only committing crime because he can't afford to feed his kids.
Right.
It's like, this is the saddest story I've ever read. But this is a normal superhero comic, So there was that, and then from a TV side, it was all this, people who had just done copious amounts of LSD that were given children's shows to run, and then just put demented puppets on for hours at a time. So that was I don't know.
But this
is cheaper than therapy.
But you're too young for the real LSD's TV shows like Puffin stuff. You didn't have H&R.
Well, but stuff. The reruns of that kind of stuff was running basically all through my childhood. Yeah, so I don't know if people remember the Letter People, things like that. Like
Oh,
where it's just
flashbacks now.
Oh yeah, like and any time I can't see an image, like immediately the theme song goes in my head, and I'm just see like Mr. H is like bouncing around.
Okay, this is explaining some of these images.
Well, that's just it. I feel like basically everything I'm doing, it's either some version of like Edward Gorey, or it's there's that, or it's like a Jim Henson Muppet, or some version of that. So.
And then, I mean, just from kind of reading some interviews you've done in the past, I know you kind of found your first kind of real, kind of eye-opening comic when you got here to the great city of Columbus.
That's true, yes.
And it was Daniel Clowes, right? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Ghost World.
It was Ghost World. Okay, I was going to ask which one it was. And what can you just, I mean, what was it about Clowes' work and Ghost World in particular that kind of got you jazzed? Because you started writing for the Lantern, doing comics for the Lantern shortly after you.
Right. Which wasn't. It's funny because the comics I did for the Lantern, which were absolutely terrible, I would not seek them out ever. Actually, most of them have never been reprinted, thank God. But
we can find them.
Yes, I'm sure you somewhere in microfiche they're rotting away. But it wasn't really even so much Ghost World per se. It was more finding a book. Because I got really serious about doing comics when I was maybe 15 or 16, but they were kind of superhero comics. Right. And then the more I started asking myself questions of like, wait, why is he wearing this stupid outfit? And like, would he really, like, are those powers really believable? That doesn't make sense. So it kind of segued more into science fiction, and then segued into people being sad in their bedrooms, questioning what they were going to do that day and things like that. So just slowly turning the camera inward. And
so when you got there, this is my other favorite poster. This is our family crest, actually.
So I mean, it was honestly, to some degree on my part, I feel like it was kind of lazy because I was into independent film and literary novels and things like that, but I really it did not occur to me that the stories I was doing in comics had any place out there, because really, I just didn't see anybody that would publish that kind of stuff. So I kind of just stopped and decided I would do the next most lucrative thing and be a philosophy professor. Because I'm brilliant like that. But so when I read Ghost World, it was just a revelation of, this is much closer to the kind of stuff I was doing. But the bigger revelation, honestly, was when I read, the next thing I found of his was Like a Velvet Glove Cast in Iron, which is, sort of this David Lynchian kind of story. And the fact that was the same guy that had done both of those, that was honestly
a very different style of storytelling. And so Ghost World, for those who don't know, is about, obviously, many of you have seen the movie, maybe about two girls going through kind of transition from adolescence to what comes next. And like a Velvet Glove is like a bad David Lynch dream about a snuff film, and it's
totally disturbing. And
Clowes is really drawn towards a kind of almost kind of caricature and a kind of seeing and highlighting a kind of grotesqueness in people that's not part of your work.
No, not really.
No.
I mean, I don't think so. I hope not. But.
I mean, you share sometimes a sense of humor, but I think your vision of humanity is, I'd say, kinder.
Okay, well that's good.
You can both go to dark places, but you go there with I think a little less misanthropy than perhaps comes through in his work. The other thing you did almost immediately after you, and maybe you were doing this in college too, is you started playing in a band. You were fronting a band, right?
Not in college. I mean, I played music in college, but I didn't really get too serious about music until I got into. Okay, there's me.
Is that you?
That is me.
All right.
You can't tell. I'm trying to think. Probably that was like 2004-ish, something like that. It was when I really got serious about music.
So you were getting really serious about music, and you guys had an album. The band was The Arcs, is that right?
Just Arcs,
The Arcs.
Yes, but
Arcs.
We had every version of that appear on posters and things. So.
And you had at least one album, right?
We had two, yeah.
Two albums. And so, I mean, you're doing that kind of putting, writing songs for the band and singing for the band. At the same time, you're getting your kind of career as a cartoonist is starting to kind of get more serious as well.
Right.
These are two pretty different creative endeavors here.
Yeah, I don't know.
You know,
they weren't that different for me.
Really? Because you know, I mean, I think to me, I mean, the kind of spontaneity and the kind of performance that comes with doing this, it's very different than as you've described it, the kind of, you know, hermetic isolation and slow movements that comes with creating comics. I mean, did they feed off each other in ways, or?
I mean, not really. I think they were both kind of symptoms of the same thing. I mean, it was like to a large degree, I just sort of come up with ideas, and I mean, because I also write prose and been writing screenplays and things like that, and just kind of doing stuff. And I mean, I think that was something that I sort of had to come to terms with over my 20s, where I was like, it's okay to not just do one thing, you know?
Right.
I mean, which is something that I feel like creatively people usually push you, like you have to do one thing, because if you do more than one thing, you know, obviously those other things must be terrible, terrible hobbies that everyone will just ignore that you do. So, I mean, a lot of times I would come up with something and think, well, that's kind of more of a song, or, okay, well, maybe that's more of a comic, or, you know, maybe that's a film, or whatever. But, yeah, I mean, they all kind of start from a common place. I mean, actually making the music, yes, that was a very different process than actually making the comics. And it gets much faster. Yes, exactly. Yeah, you're actually.
But no, I think it's. I mean, to me, you know, because I talk to, you know, young aspiring filmmakers and cartoonists in their 20s all the time, and they always think you have to do one thing. It's about, and they lose sight of, as you say, that all of this comes from a common place, and and particularly in this age of where we're all crossing media and telling stories across different media. There's no reason one needs to feel bound to following one creative outlet. Young people, listen.
I mean, that's just it. I don't think you should never feel pressured to do everything. Obviously, if you have no interest in those other things, don't do it. But there was a student that was asking about that in one of the classes I was talking at, and you know, she would say, "Oh, I want to do, you know, illustrations, but I also want to do comics, and I also want to do this." And I was like, "Great.
Yeah.
Who's stopping you from doing that?" And the fact is, almost all artists I know do plenty of other things. Like they paint, but they also do silkscreen posters, and they're in a band, and whatever, you know, because there's no reason not to. So
other cartoonists are in bands too?
Anders Nilsson was actually the front, lead singer of a punk band, which you would not think from reading his comics necessarily, but since they're very quiet. Yeah, but Chris Ware has always played music.
Yeah, that's right. He plays.
I mean, you know, Robert Crumb plays banjo. Right. There's a lot of cartoonists. I mean, because that's the rhythm of producing music is very similar to.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Is that, you know, I mean, there does seem to be, certainly at the very least, it's so many cartoonists, including a lot coming out of the kind of greater Midwestern comics crucible, have deep investments in music and kind of exploring music. And I've often wondered about the kind of connection between comics and music, which on one hand seems impossible because, well, for the simple fact that comics don't have sound. Don't have a soundtrack. And finding ways to represent sound in comics, of course, is often one of the greater challenges that we face.
For sure, yeah.
Do you kind of have a sense of the relationship between them, where they kind of, you said the rhythms of making music and making comics, although very different pacing, have a lot in common for you?
I mean, to me, I just see it all as a spectrum. I mean, like, you know, Walter Murch, when he's talking about editing film, he prefers to stand up because if he's not standing up, he can't move, you know, and he basically can't dance with the film that he's editing. And it's actually for back problem reasons, I stand up while I work now. It's got nothing to do with that, but there is, I mean, when I'm writing comics, when I'm figuring out the page, when I'm figuring out the layout of a double page spread, whatever it is, I mean, I am feeling like, okay, no, you know, I need to hold that note longer. This is, you know, that beat isn't right. And, you know, you know, when I teach comics, I mean, that's a big thing that I try to emphasize to students is like, you know, you need to pay attention to, like, you know, when you get to the end of the page, that's a little, you know, you got a little quarter beat there before the eye moves up here. And, you know, you're paying attention to the actual, you know, the physics of the page and how things flow through that. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's totally related. It's symbols moving across a page in something related to time, you know, and I think that's relatable to, you know, staff music or whatever, but obviously that's a much more abstracted version of that. So
that's awesome. I mean, one big difference, and this is just something actually that I'm kind of always fascinated with and kind of struggle to kind of find ways to describe myself as I'm a reader, not a creator of comics. Yet I always feel that with comics, more than with music, more than with film, more than with a novel, the creator has always to kind of negotiate with a reader who has necessarily more freedom to rebel, more freedom to be unruly, more freedom to, not wait that quarter beat, but maybe backtrack and rewind or move the eye around the page in other ways. And I was just kind of wanted to ask you about your own sense of the kind of relationship between cartoonists and their readers, which always seems to me a more highly charged relationship than maybe other artists have with their readers. A love-hate relationship, perhaps. Dan Clowes often describes it as a fairly more of a hate relationship. The sense that in comics, because it's such an elliptical form, because there is so much freedom for the eye, that the creator needs a reader who's ready to meet him or her halfway.
Right.
Is that what's that like for you when you think about your ideal reader, or when you talk with readers later about how they respond to the work, as opposed to how you maybe hoped they would?
I don't know. I mean, that is one thing, is that to a large degree, and I think this is talking with anybody, my friends that are novelists or whatever, you just kind of can't think about the reader too much. I mean, you definitely have to think about how you're servicing sort of the general reader, am I getting this message across, how am I pacing this, things like that. I don't necessarily think about, is everyone going to have the exact same emotional reaction to this or whatever. But as far as to get to your first point about, the fact that somebody can, skip stuff or skip across the page and see that big panel over there, to some degree, you have to keep that stuff in mind. You have to think about how you're engineering the page and the layout, so that, so at the very least you're meeting them halfway, so that you're not, the surprise panel isn't this big with, two small panels. Obviously they're going to see the surprise panel the first thing they do when they turn to see the page, so it's not their fault they saw it, you screwed up, And Chris Ware has a quote about that, with something like, in any other medium, people might blame this or that, but with comics, it's all your fault, to some degree, yes, if somebody just wants to, blaze through your work, they've kind of broken the contract already, so there's not much you can do about that.
Because there is, they do have a lot of work to do, right, to fill in.
Absolutely, to a large degree, the person reading the comic is ultimately the author of the comic to begin with, because, the real engine of comics is what's happening in between the panels, not so much the panels themselves, because, I can have, whatever, a picture of this person doing that, and then a picture of a person doing something else, and you're filling in what they did in between those panels, or you're filling in the fact that, this panel was on Mars, and then I've got a, panel of someone opening a tuna can. Yeah. You decide, did we just, transport from Mars? Did we cut from that? Did the tuna can come from Mars? What, what's...
There's that famous Chris Ware.
Great story. Make sure somebody writes that. Terrible.
Yeah, you're just giving stuff away.
Yeah,
here.
Gold.
Chris Ware had that famous diagram of those two panels of kind of Quimby hitting Sparky on the head with the hammer, and then he kind of diagrams all the billions of possible things that people could think of. And I remember the first time I read that, I just was paralyzed. I thought, I'm never reading a comic again. This is too much burden on me. But it is an interesting collaboration.
That's the thing that I try, again, when I'm talking with students, so that I try to make sure that they're thinking about, because I think it's very easy to say, well, this is what I meant. And it's like, well, okay, someone who has the grave misfortune to not be you, what do you think they're getting out of this? And that's whenever I would have my little sister, she was always my reader when I was younger. The poor girl. But I would give her stuff, and the question that I would always ask her is, just tell me what's happening. Don't tell me and then he feels this, and then he's thinking about this, and then no. Just tell, he walks in the room, he picks up the thing, he goes over here, and then if it didn't make sense to her, just sort of on a bare bones point A to point B thing, I'd already failed, because I wasn't getting across certain things. And then, getting into deeper levels of metaphor and symbolism and things like that, okay, that's a whole other thing. But
like this little guy.
yes.
I love that guy. This is from Paul's most recent book, Living with Mr. Dangerous, which came out last year, right?
Life with Mr. Dangerous.
Life with Mr. Dangerous.
Right.
It serialized for about 4 years in Mom.
Yeah, about 4 years, yeah.
Is terrific. I actually want to talk about this book in just a second. But I want to maybe kind of just, since you are a cartoonist who you deal a lot, one of your main themes is family, and particularly relationships between children and parents as both are growing older or going through major changes. I was wondering if you just kind of, surely this question must come up and maybe is beyond the most familiar one that you hear, because this theme runs so much of your work, all the way up through your most recent work. But how much you kind of looking back kind of see these particularly since much of your work was taking place during your own transitional period from kind of college to adulthood, how much of it is about kind of working through your own issues about making these big transitions? Themes that were, of course, also in Ghost World as well.
Right, yeah. No, I think it's, every book I've done is basically a snapshot of the time I was creating it. Every character I do is me.
So this was a real happy time.
Oh yeah, I was exuberant.
This is his first book, his first full-length graphic novel, Mother Come Home, which is amazing. First book.
But not very chipper.
But not very chipper, no. The least chipper of your books.
Yes, this is definitely true.
They've gotten more chipper.
And to kind of go back to the audience reaction, when a lot of people, I got a lot of letters from people assuming that it was real and that, it was strict autobiography.
Even though you kind of, you mentioned your father right away.
Well, and I think it was kind of a shock for people when the next book was The Three Paradoxes, and it's me, walking around with my dad.
Right.
And they're like, wait, but that guy, what? Okay, I don't understand. I won't give away anything with the book,
right.
But that didn't make a whole lot of sense if you thought the first book was real. So, I have totally lost track of the question at this point.
Yes.
It was.
Oh, how much is? Obviously, as an artist, everything does come out of autobiographical spaces to some degree, but has, the relationship you describe in your most explicitly autobiographical comic, unless I'm misreading it, is The Three Paradoxes.
Sure.
That's the one where there's this character named Paul, and he's back visiting his family in Ohio.
And a guy who looks a lot like my dad is my dad.
Yeah, the guy looks a lot like you. I could recognize you even without being Facebook friends because of reading Three Paradoxes. So, in that one, which is the book that's most explicitly autobiographical and most about the kind of creative process and the ways in which the creative process, you've kind of, your character, this guy named Paul, has gone home in part because you seem to be in a creative moment of being stuck with this kind of rather remarkable graphic novel that you're working on. Here it is in blue pencils in the style of the book. For those who haven't read it, he uses, and I think there's some images from it up on the wall there. He kind of, as the character Paul is thinking and working on the comic that he's kind of stuck with, we see the blue pencil, which is what you work in, right, in your kind of in your draft form. And you've gone home in part clearly because, the character's gone home. See, I'm trying to remember my professorial training here. Because you're kind of looking for something to unstick you and kind of going home, but home also represents that kind of place of paralysis and drawing at the kitchen table again. How much of kind of returning to this theme has been important for your own kind of personal growth as a storyteller and an artist?
I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. This is the kind of stuff that I feel like, 4 seconds before I die, I'll be like, I get it.
And
then
right. I'll be there. I'll be there. And I'll ask you that.
Yeah. Hey, real quick before you die, I know you guys want to say bye to him, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of weird. Like the 3 paradoxes sort of became this weird exercise in self-parody in that I wrote the story and then had a really hard time finishing it. So the story was about me having a really hard time finishing this book, and then I was writing the book that I was having a hard time finishing. It was about me having a hard... Yeah, and I'm drawing myself having a hard time drawing the stuff that is also me, and like, yeah, don't do that. That's I do in a really bad headspace. And
it kind of comes through, and this comes through both with humor and with pain in the book. One of the ways you seem to get yourself out of it is though through the formal experiments that you do in the book, using different styles throughout the book to kind of create different spaces. We go back in time. This is young childhood Paul
it was like 5th grade or 4th grade or something.
In kind of classic 4-color style, going through some traumatic experiences with some Freudian overtones. Here is, of course, as is part of most people's struggles with parents and childhood, Zeno describing only 3 of his paradoxes because one of them was a little too weak, according to his partner and mentor, and trying to convince a very cranky Socrates using, how would you describe this style? What is
it was pretty much ripped off of Jay Ward's Rocky and Bullwinkle. The cover that's in the book where it says Zeno and Friends, that's completely based off of a Dell Rocky and Friends cover, which if you find, I mean, like the colors are exact same. Everything is based off of that. So
I love Zeno meets Rocky and Bullwinkle.
It just seemed logical.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes, oops, I'm going ahead there. There's actually one more kind of story, that kind of interlude that goes into kind of almost a more of a kind of 1960s or 70s comic book style.
Right.
The story of the accident. And it kind of made me wonder. I mean, you describe yourself as a largely self-taught artist.
Yeah, for the most part. I took some art classes.
I mean, but
at least one of the professors is here, so I don't want to offend people and say I was totally self-taught.
You have some remarkable chops, as they say. I mean, I think of, when I kind of close my eyes and I think of your style, I have this kind of sense of what your style is, and then when I open your books, I'm kind of dazzled by how many styles you can work in. I was wondering if you could, I mean, do you have a kind of preferred style to work in? I guess I think of this as your kind of natural style.
I mean, I guess I sort of think of that as the, sort of reality style that I draw in. No, I mean, honestly, that was a thing that, very early on. I mean, again, the real influence from Dan Klaus was seeing him do 2 totally different books, and that's something that I always really responded to, whether it was, like Sonic Youth was kind of my favorite band growing up, or, I don't know, David Byrne was somebody I had sort of endless respect for, but like it was these people that kind of kept pushing themselves to reinvent and come up with new things and do different stuff. Because that was one thing I just never understood, like. And I see this with young artists where it's like, I gotta find my style, and it's just like, oh my god, I gotta not find a style. Like anything I can do to not have a style sounds good to me. So it's probably again self-hatred or something like that, but we won't get into that. But but yeah, I don't know. I mean, to me, it just kind of having more of a science philosophy background, to me, it kind of seemed like trying to solve every problem with the same equation or something like that, and like that just didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Like I would hear people talk about like, oh, I'm a conceptual artist, and I'm like, isn't that just an artist? Like I don't understand. Like you should be, I mean, like to some degree, it's what is the concept, what does the story need, and if you're just saying like, well, no matter what story I'm telling, I'm always going to draw it this way. I mean, to me, that's just that would be bad math, that would be bad art. Like I don't really understand approaching things that way. So. And
particularly with a story like this, which has so many different layers moving back and forth in time, the formal experiments also allow us to kind of follow a rather kind of complex layered narrative.
Right. I mean, I don't really think it would be possible to tell that story with just one story. I mean,
It wouldn't
yeah,
be-
maybe, but it'd be really hard to
Nor
follow.
would
that
it be
one.
possible to tell in prose, right? I mean, it's a good example, I think, to some degree of something
Yeah.
that you have kind of, even as you're writing about being stuck, kind of also kind of open up all the ways in which comics can do remarkable things that other forms can't do.
I mean, and to some degree, the book. I mean, I will say this sort of just the catalyst for the story was the Zeno and Parmenides story, because I was like, oh, there's something here, because this is like one of the most poetic things that's ever been done. Is that this guy? I don't know if people know Zeno's paradoxes of motion and change, but look him up. But here's this person that basically, came up with something that essentially wasn't solved until I think maybe in the last 10 years using quantum mechanics.
Right.
And that Kant said, I guess, some line along the lines of all philosophy is meaningless because we haven't solved Zeno's paradoxes. But the reason he was really proposing these was to defend his lover, Parmenides, who had come up with, he said that nothing ever changes and that motion doesn't exist, which sounds really stupid, but Zeno managed to come up with these paradoxes that proved he was right, even though it still didn't make any sense. So,
And didn't ultimately succeed in defending him.
No, I mean, everybody still thought Parmenides was nuts, but it was this I just thought that was like one of the, nicest things that anyone had ever done for anybody. Like, like how many of us can say, like, oh, you came up with this crazy idea and I created something that defended your honor for 2,000 years. I just give my wife some flowers. Like, it's nothing in comparison. So
You still got a long career ahead of you.
Right.
No, that's awesome.
But what I was going to say is that, one of the other things in doing the book was that, and it's no offense, I have very good friends that do autobiographical comics, but there was, as I was seeing more autobiographical stuff kind of coming out of younger cartoonists and stuff like that, I was like, there's a lot more we could do with this. I mean, if you look at what people were doing with autobiographical works in film and in prose, where they were playing with, is this autobiography? How much do I need it to just be about me to be autobiographical? I just felt like, I don't know, we could do a lot more. So.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, that's part of what I sensed in reading it. Maybe it was just because I was kind of doing comics criticism pretty full time at that point and reading way too many autobiographical comics.
Sure.
And so when that book came out, I kind of felt like you were channeling some of my frustration with
Right.
autobiographical comics.
A lot of my comics have come out of just like anger and
a lot of my criticism too. We should get to it. I love all your works, but for some reason, Three Paradoxes is the one I keep reading again and again. The other thing is you've collected wonderfully for us all a few years ago some of your uncollected work in All and Sundry, and some of your early kind of serialized work in Forlorn Funnies, which you started doing. When did you start Forlorn Funnies?
2002, I think, is when it first came out.
And a lot of this is shorter work, and a lot of it is quite funny. And in fact,
I hope. I don't know.
really funny. I know it's supposed to be forlorn, but it's it kind of comes out of this is an example that my kids particularly find funny, because it's playing off of that kind of schoolyard trash talking with cute ice cream. And one of the things I was struck by looking at this stuff is the fact that so much of your other stuff outside the autobiographical comes out of a kind of underground comic sensibility.
Right. I don't know. I'm not sure what to say about that.
Like, no influence of Robert Crumb or more.
Well, honestly, the thing is, I didn't really know Robert Crumb's work. I had seen, Keep On Truckin' On Mud Flap probably at some point, and I probably saw the Big Brother and the Holding Company cover or something like that. But I really didn't have that much of a. I would say the humor kind of comes more from, my mom is a bit of a ham, and kind of reading, New Yorker cartoons.
You show
and stuff
your
like
mom
that.
these comics?
I think my parents. Well, I know at one point someone stormed into my father's law office. I think his son had gotten one of my comics and shown it to him. Was like, oh yeah, Paul Hornschemeier does these comics now, and I think that was the comic with a bear that has a dildo.
I remember that.
And
that's one of the ones that made me think.
one of the gems. I was a little bit sleep deprived in college, but did a lot of crazy comics. But he stormed into my dad's office and was like, "Do you know what your son's doing?" And I, will forever be proud of my father that he said, "Yes, I know what he's doing." That was it. That's about as excited as my parents get either. So
that's again.
they're
I
very
think something
supportive,
else that Ohio gives.
Yes. Well, and I do think.
Parents.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is like, my sister basically gets people off of death row, and my older sister's an astrophysicist, and like, people are like, "Man, what's up with your family?" Like, it seemed like, and it's like, it's just my parents are impossible to impress. So it's just, you just had to work hard to even get them to be like, "Huh," So. I don't know. I feel like it comes more out of, just kind of, I've always liked to joke around a lot. It wasn't really so much underground comics per se. If underground comics is qualified as like the New Yorker, then I guess I don't think it's underground comics.
Well, I guess one last question before I want to turn it over to some other people to ask some questions, which is something I noticed in Mr. Dangerous is that's the comic where it feels to me, your book, where it feels to me you're bringing your kind of your humor, and even some of the kind of wacky, kind of crazy humor, and the kind of life of the inner life behind the false appearances that we put forward, which is another theme that runs through the book. And you're really bringing them together. It seems like that's where cartoon and comics are teaming up. And I love this poster, as I mentioned, just because I love cartoon and comics, and I hate the outdoors.
Which I don't, by the way. But I thought a lot of people could relate.
Yeah, no, they can. Well, you know your audience.
Yeah.
But I wondered if you kind of going forward with your kind of work that you're doing now, do you think about these as two different modes? I mean, obviously part of Mr. Dangerous was about kind of doing both together within the same story, whereas they remain kind of separate even within Three Paradoxes. Here they're kind of fully part of the same story world. Is that something you're going to be, where is your work going forward? We got Grant coming up, I know.
Right. Well, the Grant thing is I don't know when that'll come out. That's going to take a long time to develop. Because any one of my books, it really is like the germ of the idea for Life of Mr. Dangerous was 11 years ago. So my books take a long time. But yeah, I don't know. My work moving forward, like I just got done doing a lot of animation stuff for a TV show and like.
Cool. What TV show?
Comedy Bang Bang, which is coming out in the summer from IFC. So watch for lots of weird cubist heads floating over top of actors and stuff. I don't know. I don't know what I do half the time, but I don't know. So I've been exploring a lot more stuff where it is like hyper cartoony, like very much coming out of. Because another huge influence on me was like the Yellow Submarine, which I feel like I watched at least twice a year at my grandmother's house for some reason. That's not a movie that any child should watch, but I watched it a lot. Kind of exploring like various animation influence stuff and kind of the Jim Henson side of things. But I don't know. I'm not really sure. I think I'm sort of at the same time pushing everything farther apart, but bringing it together into stories.
They're looking for a new writer for the next Muppet movie. I heard.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll get on that. I don't know, but I'm working on things that are purely kind of genre work, where it's like I'm doing a science fiction story that's in the style of 1960s filmation, like animation stills, but it's a comic. But then, like my next, sort of person dealing with sad sack issues story is, and it's weird because there's some sort of hallucinogenic kind of stuff in that, but all of his hallucinations are much more similar to his actual reality. Like he's kind of having problems parsing what is actually real and what's not, because he really is not okay with where his reality is. Much more so than, I feel like, I described it to someone as a slightly more happy death of a salesman. So it's a little bit more somebody more advanced in their life, kind of looking at what their life has become, versus I feel like a lot of the books are a little bit more kind of looking more toward childhood and moving forward.
At a
so.
kind of transitional
Yeah,
period.
right.
And this is a book about somebody who's there now and is not happy.
Yes.
Working title?
The title is Obvious Amenities is the name of it, so yes.
Terrific.
That will, Forlorn Funnies is going to be relaunched as a series, so that will be serialized in that.
Who's going to be publishing it?
Fantagraphics is
Oh,
putting that out,
terrific.
so, yeah.
Great, wonderful.
So that's the next thing I'm working on.
I wanted to, how are we for time?
We're doing all right.
Yeah. I know, I wanted to kind of invite and encourage people who are coming with questions for Paul, since I've been hogging him for a while now.
Which, by the way, can be about anything. Don't feel like, I feel like sometimes it's like, oh, I have to ask.
No, I have to approve of them.
Yes, yes. Be screening through
They've been writing first.
No, it could be about, I don't know, comics publishing, or like you were joking about, like, oh yeah, I want you to get questions like what pen to use. If you have questions like that, it's totally fine. I don't care. So don't feel like there's a
I
bad
have seen
question.
cartoonists literally wince.
Oh no, yeah, I know people wince at that, and I just don't get that. Because I mean, honestly, that was one thing, especially coming from a small town in Ohio, and then kind of starting to do comics in pre-internet days, or just kind of at the dawn of that being more ubiquitous. Like, I had no idea what anybody did anything with, or how. Like, I would see a line and be like, okay, I guess I'll just use this pen to try to make that kind of line. I don't know. I mean, I did the first 300 pages of my comics with a lettering nib because I was just like, well, it makes a line, so. So don't feel like you can't ask those kind of questions. Of course, now you can Google stuff pretty quickly, but Yeah.
Okay, so you're a pretty humble guy.
Yes, I'm not sure how to answer that. Yes,
Well,
I am.
Well, it's part of the Ohio thing.
Yeah.
Now, you've won some awards, right?
No, not.
Oh, okay.
Wait, here's where I sound like a real jackass. Not in the U.S.
But you've been nominated, though.
I've been nominated for awards in America. But
And I was curious what your take is on awards in comics.
Okay. Like whether they should exist?
No. I mean, but
I think they're a good thing. I don't know.
there's the Eisners,
Mhm.
and then there's the Harvey Awards,
Right.
and then there's the Ignats, and there's, whatever the one is over on the Isotopes.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. And then, here in Columbus, we've got Space.
Sure.
And I think there's one for Ape.
Okay.
They have, and that might
This
be
is all pretty
Isotope.
inside baseball, but
Yeah.
Eisner's
Well,
basically the
overall,
Oscars, so
I mean, it's the
that-
difference between, Academy Awards and then
Right.
the Golden Globes.
Right.
I mean, and I was just curious your take on awards, because the kind of stuff that you do is more of that awards-based type. Not that you're doing it for awards.
That's all I do for you.
Right, but compared to, you've sold this many comics.
Right.
Kind of thing. So I was just curious about your.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that, in general, they're good because they, whatever, make some people aware of certain books they maybe wouldn't have heard of otherwise. So it's good for that. It is definitely interesting when you see some nominations for things where, and they're all done differently. Like, honestly, one of my favorite awards is the Ignatz Awards, which is given at the Small Press Expo that's held in Maryland. The reason I like that is it's something that's jurred only by independent small press people, and the jurors from each year are picked by the people from the previous year. Like, you suggest, okay, I'm going to suggest this person or that person or whatever. And that was, I was on the jury one year, and it was a really fun process because you just get several gigantic boxes of cool independent comics, and I feel like that one, and the actual award is a brick because it's named after Ignatz, who would, and when you think about, like, to me, that's the best award possible because what the brick meant in Harriman's comics was love. And so it's this really nice poetic gesture that other cartoonists are awarding, and it's only voted on by people at the convention who are, basically 100% independent cartoonists. So I feel like that's kind of the most pure award that you can get. But yeah, I don't know. I think the other ones, they're fun, I guess. I don't know. To some degree, it's all kind of arbitrary. It's, there's a lot of politics involved and things like that. But I don't know. Hopefully, does that answer the question? Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
I have two. What do you color with?
is one,
Yeah.
and the other is before you were published by any of the companies, did you have to deal with distribution yourself at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So to answer the coloring question, I color almost solely in Photoshop. I'm kind of varying that a little bit more now. I'm doing a lot more stuff with colored pencil and gouache and things like that. But most of the stuff, I mean, like I colored a series for Marvel, Omega the Unknown, and like that was 100% Photoshop.
That one, Photoshop there.
That is all Photoshop, yeah. But that was a probably 20-step process. If you email me, I actually, Michel Gondry, who strangely was working in comics for like 10 seconds, I don't know if he's still going to do comics, but he saw that book and was like, how did you do this? And so I actually typed up the whole process, so if you ever want it, just email me and I'll send it to you. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing in Photoshop, which is something I feel like, a lot of people don't necessarily pay attention to. I mean, one thing that Photoshop's good for is emulation of old printing processes and stuff like that. So I was kind of basing this on like Bazooka Joe comics that you would see printed really crappy with just red and yellow and black ink, or even some of the original like Supermans were just like, 2-color, 3-color. But so that's, the coloring question. And then as far as distribution, I self-published I did a series called Sequential that I started in college, and I did that for about 2.5 years. I should say I dealt with distribution initially by walking into the 2 stores that carried my comics and handing them, the 10 issues that I could spare that I wasn't giving to my family and friends. In the last couple of years, totally unnerved. A guy came into a convention and said, I have all of your stuff. And I was like, well, obviously you don't have all my stuff. And he pulled out Sequential number 1, and I was like, but you're not my mom? It's weird. Because, the first one I did, I think 25 or 30 copies or something like that, and because I really just, there were no aspirations about anything. And I think, the second issue I did 50, and the third issue I did, I think maybe like 80, and the fourth issue I did 450 Baroque Encounter at Kinko's. I think the statute of limitations is running. I basically was like, okay, I think I was maybe going to do 100 that time, and I started making copies, and I was like, why isn't this thing taking money off? I'm like, oh, hell yeah. I started making as many as I could. That one actually was my first, I think that was the first digitally color. When I was doing color initially, I was really using self-adhesive Pantone sheets and doing overlays and making color photocopies of it. I had no idea what I was doing. The first color cover was, I think, Sequential number 4, and the girl I was dating at the time colored it in Photoshop because I had no idea how to use Photoshop. So, initially, and then once, I think it was maybe issue 5, I actually started trying to, figure out, is Diamond, I guess, probably still the main show, I guess. So I really only did a few issues where I was kind of dealing with distributors. But one of the most helpful things I did was, I don't remember if I did it with Sequential 5 or 6, whatever. I've stopped doing it with Sequential 7 because I bankrupted myself. Unfortunately, I got a publisher right after that, so always try to do that right after you completely broke, get a publisher. The advice I give is make sure you make a joke in the back of the book like I did, which is if you're a rich philanthropist person and want to publish my books, and some nut job who had been in the Navy for 10 years and hadn't spent any of his checks decided he would waste all his money publishing comics, so I bankrupted him. One of the things I did that really was helpful was I just sent, because you can find lists online of the best independent stores, and I just sent one copy of the book to each one of those stores with a handwritten note saying, it's my book, it's going to be in Diamond whatever month, if you could order some, obviously I'd appreciate it or whatever. And I had people from the stores come up, and in some cases it was years later, but they said, you sent me one of your comics, and that really made a big difference because a lot of people don't do that. Because a big problem too with a huge distribution catalog is, it's all about real estate, and most of those stores, it's they got a couple guys that are going through the catalog, picking out whatever, and if they haven't had somebody tell them you should get that book, most of the time they're not going to know about it. So having anything that you can do to kind of personalize yourself and get in touch, and the sad fact is there's so few stores these days that you can have a couple friends over and stuff some envelopes and pretty much contact them all in an afternoon or something like that. So Yeah, does that answer the distribution question? Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
What's your email?
My email is paul@margotmitchell, it's margomitchell.com. And if you forget it or whatever, it's, you can badly misspell my name and Google will correct you. Which is honestly probably the best thing that's ever happened in my career, is that, because I totally recognize I have a name that's impossible to spell, so.
And actually, margotmitchell.com, you can also, that's where you can find some of those great poster work you do too.
Sure, yeah.
That gallery deals, your poster and design works, and some.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically like design and illustration.
Right.
That's where all that stuff is, but yeah, you can always read that. I think I saw a hand maybe way in the back, I don't know. Or was that just somebody stretching? Yep.
I want to hear a little about your process, specifically like matching words to images. It seems like it kind of be actually similar to like making music and matching
Sure.
lyrics and music, and I know that can be, those two things always don't make sense with each other.
Right.
And
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been really different for every book, honestly. I mean, like with Mother Come Home, there wasn't really a full script that I wrote, and then, I mean, one thing is I never dogmatically adhere to anything that I write, because once you get to the page, the page is going to kind of tell you what it needs to do, and if you're not paying attention to that, it's going to not really feel right. It's not going to feel very honest or anything. And a lot of times doing comics is much more similar to kind of doing poetry, because you almost always got to say it with less. And usually that's going to be the best writing anyway. But yeah, I don't know, as far as actually selecting what the words are, one thing I'm a huge fan of is, say it out loud, and if it doesn't sound right, then it's wrong. I'm trying to remember who has the quote of, if it sounds like writing, rewrite it. Is that Elmore Leonard? Is anybody? I don't know.
Sounds like something.
Sounds like something you would say. I think that's him. But yeah, that's a big thing. I mean, it's just, somebody was asking me about character development, and I think I don't really develop characters because I feel like they're just sort of slices of some part of my unconscious, but I feel like my job is basically to act as their Sharky agent. And when situations come up with offers and like, yeah, we want to do this, see? And I'm like, yeah, we're not really interested in that. It's not going to work for you. But just not having your character say or do something that doesn't seem like it works. And it's the same thing with words, yeah. Whether it's voiceover or caption, or it's somebody actually saying something. Can you say it with less? And another major thing is just what is the actual emotional beat of that panel or that sentence or whatever? What are you really trying to say? And then can you say it with less words? Are you actually getting at the heart of what you're trying to say? So I don't know if that really got to.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question? Okay.